if you're watching on video, you would know what I'm going through right now because like when little kids are on virtual schooling on their Zoom calls, what they do is they try to get their face off of the camera. And so what Frank is doing right now is he keeps lowering his head so I can't see his mouth, but I can see his face moving. He's clearly chewing, but he doesn't want me to see that he's shoveling food into his mouth. So what he's doing is he's dip diving and ducking just like in dodgeball, so I can't see him. But Frankie, I can see you chewing. There's not 30 kids in a fifth grade class here. It's just me and you. I can see you chewing. You're not getting away with it. Most everyone has taken a job where on day one, they immediately knew that what they were sold is not the actual reality taking place at the company. And they're left wondering, what did I miss? Well, this episode is all about red flags that try to keep you from running into this situation. What can you look for? We're not just talking about the obvious. The interviewer has a tattoo of a swastika on his hand. We're talking about a little bit more subtle or nuanced views of red flags that you can see in the interviewing process so that you can keep yourself from making a terrible decision in your career. If you're new to our podcast, click that subscribe button. And if you've been around for a while, hit us up with that Apple 5-star review.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch!
Man, I'm glad I drove all the way down to Richmond last night to hang out with you and record episodes today, even though I'm in my office recording this episode today.
Back in Vienna. Ian came down last night, had too much of me, and turned around and left. But the good news is Ian is overly fed. He's had 3 breakfasts, skipped his workout.
Delicious bottle of wine.
That's correct. Saw my kids, met my youngest son for the first time. And
although what scared me away was the personal trainer session that you hired for me. I know you're nudging me into a healthier lifestyle, but as soon as that dude showed up, I was like, I really got some stuff to do up north.
Dude's pretty jacked for 55 years old. Ian is overly fed. I'm a bit hungry coming into this podcast, so Ian gets frustrated when I eat. So I'm going to actually eat soup with my bare hands while we record just to see how that goes. Hopefully that really produces a good product.
See, Frank doesn't edit these. I have to sit and watch these afterward, and watching Frank eat salad and just shovel it in his mouth while I'm talking on a podcast is a bit.
But a perfect segue, Ian.
Oh, as you chew on something.
Just ice. But a perfect segue. The reason this podcast is taking the internet by storm, because if someone is eating soup with their bare hands, it's in an interview, then probably not the company you want to work for.
I think that's pretty fair. I think that's why our podcast does not have any employees. That's why we don't have any employees yet. I think you're scaring them away by chewing all the time on screen, or we'd have people applying. Although we did have one of our legions of fans this week, and Frank was very excited for me to send him the screenshot. We had a young lady ask us if we were on YouTube, and then immediately say that she is very thankful for all the things that we're doing for humanity with our podcast. So it feels good on a Friday to know that we are making humanity better.
I mean, boom.
I mean, that was the goal of this podcast in first place, was really
just make the world just a little bit better.
Make the world a better place, one day at a time, one episode at a time, one fan at a time. Yeah. So we are talking today. We are in the midst of the Great Resignation. More quits this year than in the history of since the government has been, especially in the U.S. economy, so the government's been taking the data. The quit rate is higher than it's ever been. More people have left their jobs. 21's been a pretty crazy year. So if you're listening to this, you might be interviewing soon, whether you think you will or not. And we are going to talk about things that you should pay close attention to and not ignore in the process that might be red flags and lead to you making a crappy decision on joining the wrong company. So go
So
ahead.
I'm going to come right out of the chute and tell a story from when I was in college. So Ian and I both have affinity for, even though we quit NVR, we both were there for years and years and years. We both had great careers. We both learned a lot of good things. Ian and I are universal. The only thing NVR sucks at is technology, but they're really a well-run company in many, many, many ways. And there's a lot of good business lessons to be learned there. But I went to a job fair in college, and it was actually, we had to travel somewhere, and it was part of the National Association of Home Builders, and they were attracting college kids. And we met all of the major builders. And I had a desire to be work for a national builder when I was in college. So I met Toll Brothers and NVR and like Centex and everybody. So this is sometime like really early January. By middle of February, I've got interviews and second interviews, and every single person I'd met with had reached out. And NVR hadn't, like they hadn't scheduled an interview, nothing had happened. And I remember picking up the phone and I called Joe Madigan, who ran HR at the time. And I said, I loved you guys. I thought you were interested in me. What's going on? And like, are you? Because like I've gotten job offers and I don't want to accept them if you're gonna, if you think I could be a fit there. So he's like, oh yeah, we're just overwhelmed. We move a little bit slow. So what I would say is this: NVR was the exception to the rule. They're an insanely well-run company with a slow-moving HR department. Every other time I've heard that story, the company sucked too. But this is one, Ian, the funny story about this is Ian worked at NVR. He got further up the chain than I did. And he basically used a third party for headhunting because HR was just so slow. They couldn't keep up with the operations. But almost every other company, if that type of thing happens, it's bad news.
Wasn't a strength. Yeah, it wasn't a strength of our company. So I ended up having to outsource it. So I think that could be red flag number one, really, Frank, is just the pre and the post interview process feels unorganized. And I think there's a lot of different ways where you can feel this. I believe that most companies, and at the time, I will say this, Frank. So when you were getting hired, the housing market was exploding. Those were signs that the company was a little overwhelmed in a lot of different areas, didn't have enough people. They were kind of always chasing, how do we get enough people trained? They were rushing people out there. NVR at the time was getting saved. That process wasn't good. NVR was getting saved by the hottest housing market ever. And you've talked often about this. When that housing bubble burst, they got exposed for having hired a lot of bad people that didn't really fit in the roles. So, at the time, NVR, yeah, good company, but it doubled in size so fast that process you felt is kind of how the company was running at the time. Everyone was kind of always chasing, trying to find the next thing. And it didn't feel organized during the housing bubble.
So let's talk this through a little bit from the standpoint of what a smaller company feels like. So as an owner of a smaller company, I now have a staff. If you have been a listener of this podcast, I had 20 something employees when we started this podcast. We're over 50. Like, we have grown, and we've grown quickly. And part of the reason for that is we have a dedicated in-house recruiter. They're directly behind me. There's actually 3 of them back there now. We're actively looking for our own personnel. But at first, I would run an ad on Indeed, and I would end up figuring out, like on the weekends or late at night, I'd be doing all my replies because it wasn't part of my core business to find people. And I didn't prioritize it. And I didn't have people. And the process wasn't great. And we attracted people who weren't great. But what we've done in the last 3 years is we built a recruiting arm with dedicated staff who run the business from 9 to 6, who follow up in a regular period of time. It feels normal to you on the other end. We're very, very, very strict with who we hire. We put you through several tests and hurdles, but it feels very professional. And because of that, the talent that we attract today is quite different than the talent we attracted 3 to 5 years ago.
I think there's a I also think size of company matters. So when you talk about organization,
Yeah.
like if you were Frank's first employee, felt organized. You're getting right through to the cell phone of the owner. You're, you're probably the first 5 employees, 6 employees, same thing. You're talking about I'm hiring Frank knows this. I'm hiring an individual part-time, and she and I are just talking. There's no process. I'm not making her fill out an application. I'm like, it doesn't feel disorganized because we're texting, we're talking back and forth, we're emailing. She's got me all that she wants. But as the company gets bigger, it's different. At the beginning, it feels organized because you're talking to one person. Now what might not feel organized is it might not feel structured. It definitely isn't structured. They don't have a good contract in place. They don't have all the HR policies, procedures. They don't have a lot of the stuff you're used to when you're real small. And then when it gets to like 10 to 20 employees, it probably can feel like a disaster because that's where you're like exploding and the company's completely changed from what it was before that. And then it starts to get more organized after 20 again, which I think is what happened with your company, Frank, because there was a time where it did not feel like a great process to get hired into Cava.
No, it was very, very wonky. Like 1 through 5, probably 1 through 10 probably feel organized. It just feels small. 10 through 25 was kind of a shit show. And then once we got the internal stuff built, then it felt a lot better.
But regardless of the size, so for me, if you're normally going to interview with 2, 3, 4 people, unless it's a tiny company. The example I just gave is an exception to the rule. If every interviewer is 15 minutes late, something's wrong with the company. If everyone is, I'm so sorry, it's crazy around here. They're really behind. They're really disorganized. They probably have way too many meetings in the company. This doesn't mean that you just say this company's out, but know that if you start working there, you will quickly start to feel like those interviewers who are late to everything. That's just, that's going to be like that inside of the company. If that many people can't show up on time to a scheduled interview.
I think that's part of it. And if you go into a company and you interview with 3 or 4 people and you tell the same story and nobody calls you out, oh, I've already heard that you've used that story, let's use another story. Those people aren't talking. That's an unorganized company. Like what we do around here is we do almost everything in a panel interview. So even if there's only 2 candidates and there's 4 interviewers, we talk in between interviews. So if we start 5 minutes late, we're consistently 5 minutes late because we're kind of moving back and forth and we're having conversations between. And what happens is we don't say, hey, I like Ian, I want to hire him. I say, I talked to Ian about these 5 things. I feel really good about them. I don't feel comfortable with his problem analysis or maybe his planning and organizing. And he really spent a lot of time talking to me about NVR, but he on his resume, he's got GE. He has talked to me about none of GE. So maybe go after GE a little bit because I got a ton of NVR. That is what it feels like on the other end when Ian brings up NVR. You're like, I know you talked to somebody else about NVR. Could you talk to me about GE? That's a well-organized company.
That's organized. Yeah, that's great.
Talking.
It's what you're talking about is coordination. So
yes.
Like if you go through 3 interviews and all 3 interviewers ask the same 10 questions as if they've never heard it before, like literally they have the same printed sheet of, tell me about a time where you had to overcome adversity. And then the next interviewer asks the same question on their second and the third. And you could tell that no one's talking. That's not an organized process. A good organized process, each interviewer is asking a little bit different questions because they're trying to get at different attributes and because to do the same interview 3 times is not terribly helpful. All that is same 3 interviews with different bias. That's all that is.
It's a waste of the candidate's time. It's a waste of your time if you're interviewing.
Yep.
So what you want to understand in an interview is, are these people prepared? Did they know I was coming? Are they excited to have me? Are they desperate to have me? That's not good. Are they excited to potentially have me? Is there a process that I can see? When people talk to me, I talk about future and I talk about comp. When they talk about somebody else on our team, it's all about fit. And then the other couple of people will talk about job specific stuff. So every interview is going to feel a little bit different. every interviewer should ask you if you have questions. That's really important. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? Like, if you don't feel prioritized in the interview, there's no way in hell you're going to be feel prioritized when you are an employee.
And on the organization side, Frankie, it's there's a lot of little clues you can just see, you can pick up in there. It's if you're working with a recruiter and the company uses only recruiters, you can kind of tell when there's not good communication between the company and the recruiter. Recruiter keeps apologizing, keeps trying to tell you, well, I'm trying to get a day, they've moved it. Or if you get that recruiter, you might have a day on the calendar and they cancel it, reschedule it, cancel it, reschedule it. You go 2 weeks without hearing anything, and then it's, can you be in tomorrow at 9 a.m? All of those things that make you feel stressed out and unorganized in the process, those are just symptoms of like how a company does one thing is how they do everything. And if the process just feels chaotic and unorganized, that doesn't mean that's going to be a bad company. It is a indicator that it's going to feel harried and unorganized when you get working there.
It's why I led with the NVR thing. NVR was a great company. 1998, when I started, NVR was not, it wasn't the go-go days of home building yet. It was busier than it was in 1990, but NVR was always understaffed in HR. I mean, it's one of the reasons that made NVR so special is they spent money on nothing. They had an ability to constantly just kind of keep things moving along with a small bit of staff, but that is an anomaly. Most companies, it feels a lot tighter.
If you're watching on video, you would know what I'm going through right now, because like when little kids are on virtual schooling on their Zoom calls, what they do is they try to get their face off of the camera. And so what Frank is doing right now is he keeps lowering his head so I can't see his mouth, but I can see his face moving. He's clearly chewing, but he doesn't want me to see that he's shoveling food into his mouth. So what he's doing is he's dip, diving, and ducking, just like in dodgeball, so I can't see him. But Frankie, I can see you chewing. There's not 30 kids in a 5th grade class here. It's just me and you. I can see you chewing. You're not getting away with it. So number 2, red flags. You have a co-host who can't stop eating when he's supposed to be running an episode of a podcast. So number 2 is, this one's pretty good. This is Frank. The interviewer seems disinterested and distracted. Could be by food. If you're interviewing with Frank, there's a good chance he's distracted by some bowl of, grains bowl of salad in front of him. Maybe.
And I'm most likely going to have to pee.
That's probably going to happen. But so what I'm talking about here, though, is you're interviewing with someone who's going to be your manager, and they can't give you 45 minutes of their time direct. They can't look you in the eyes for 45 minutes and just engage with you. They're checking their phone. Every time their phone buzzes, they pick it up and look at it. Oh, excuse me for a second. They can't put their laptop down. So you hear a Microsoft Outlook notification that a new email came in. And even if they're not opening the email, you see their eyes looking at their computer, like they're antsy, like they're fidgety. They get distracted by every noise. The phone rings and they have to check to see who's calling, or they pick it up right in front of you. For me, there's probably not many more important things than evaluating a new employee to come into your company. And if you can't give that person all of your time in that moment when you're trying to make a great impression, what is that person going to be like to work for if you're trying to get their attention? Just put yourself in that same office as an employee who's trying to get help on something you're stuck on. If they'll do that to someone who hasn't joined the company, what are they going to do to someone who's now a captive employee getting paid a salary?
We've gotten to this point in life where everybody is accustomed to distractions. And Thanksgiving was just a couple of weeks ago. My family was all together. We don't get to see each other but a handful of times during the year. My son's got a tablet. My mom's on her phone. My dad's looking at his. My wife's in the other room on her phone. Like, even if you're trying not to do this, like in today's society, we're all distracted by screens. If you're in front of an interviewer or an interviewee and you're the interviewer, figuring out ways to make sure things don't interrupt you is, I think, very, very big. And what I typically do is I get away from my screens. I leave my watch with my phone, and I bring like just an actual clock with me. I actually do this because this thing goes off all the time. It gets like, it buzzes. It's very hard to have a one-on-one conversation. And there's another side of it. As an interviewer, you're about to make a very, very serious decision. You're about to bring this person into your company. You're going to be responsible for paying them. You're going to be responsible for their livelihood and their family's livelihood if they're relying on this job. And you are not giving them your all. So you are shortchanging yourself as a company owner or a manager and that person if you're not focusing on them, because you may miss something during a distraction. You hire the wrong person, and that is just a massive pain in the ass for a bunch of reasons.
Yep. So if you feel this way as a candidate in the interview, the big red flag that manager is going to feel like that when you work for them. Number 3, and I put it down here because I think it's worth just chatting about. But if you see a bunch of reviews online, so go check their customer reviews, their Yelp reviews as customers, Google reviews as customers. So we've talked about this in the show before, and I feel strongly about this. If you show me a customer that's bad with customers, that treats customers poorly, that has poor customer service, I'll show you a company that doesn't treat its employees well. A company that has a team with just terrible morale is not going to treat customers well. So I would start with, go look at their Google reviews, their Yelp reviews. What do real customers say it's like to work with the people in that company? And if it's really poor, you should probably expect a group of unhappy people when you go work there. So I would say start with customer reviews. Glassdoor reviews, that's a different way of looking at it. And I'm kind of mixed on Glassdoor. I'd love your take on it, Frankie. But a lot of times Glassdoor, if there's not a lot of reviews with the company and the few that are on there are negative, this could be people that got fired or they weren't doing a good job. They're just kind of bitter grapes. But if there's a long line of people writing bad stuff about Glassdoor, I would not ignore it. That's a pretty powerful indicator. Now, look at when they were like, if you go look at it and the company had a bunch of negative Glassdoor reviews in 2018 and 19 and nothing in the last 2 years. I think that's important too. But if it's been a lot lately and there wasn't a lot leading up to it, that's probably why they're interviewing you anyway. They're losing people because they're unhappy that are working there.
I think Glassdoor is an indicator. I think there's a lot of other things. Does the company allow you, does the company have a website? Do they have a hiring page? So big companies, Google, huge companies have hiring pages. Publicly traded company has hiring pages. You got to work for someone with 25 employees. Do they have a hiring page? Do they have a presence on Glassdoor? Are they smart enough to be proactive to make sure they get reviewed there? No reviews does not mean there's good reviews. Do they give you access to staff? Like when you come and interview with me, if I kind of shuttle you into a back room and I push you out, like what am I not showing you? Who are you not getting to talk to? Our company, we bring you in, we put you in, have you sit in the foyer, talk to people, see how we interact. People walk by and say hello. We'll say, would you like to ask questions to anybody? Like we want to be an open book. We want to see if you fit. And if we're ever questioning that, or you have a question that's better suited to be answered by somebody else, we'll grab somebody, bring them in and say, would you please talk to so-and-so about this? Because, you're currently doing it. So those are all little things that you're going to see and feel.
There have only been a couple of times in 20 years as a manager for big companies where I even thought about Glassdoor. And that's because we were getting a bunch of bad reviews. And in both cases, it was warranted. Our morale sucked. Our turnover was really high. We were asking people to work way too much. We weren't trying to do it. We just couldn't staff up fast enough and people kept leaving. Right. And the truth was when we were getting crushed by Glassdoor reviews, we kind of were earning it. Now, as managers at the time, we're like, that's bullshit. Why would they write that? But really, if I look back on it, those were kind of crappy times to work for the company. So I would say use it as an indicator. Don't use it as your end all, but don't blow it off. Don't blow it off. Like, pay attention to it.
We say this a lot, Ian. There's not, like, Ian and I were talking earlier today about, like, how do you market? How do you advertise? Right? There's not one magic bullet. You got to do a bunch of different things. And it's no different in an interview process. They could have, NVR had one really broken process when I went there. Everything else seemed great. And it turned out to be a great decision for me to go there. But if Glassdoor doesn't look good, back then, hell, we didn't even have the internet. But if Glassdoor looks bad and there's other pieces of the process that are broken, then you start getting an indication of, you know what, I'm going to start subtracting a couple of points, and I'm maybe not going to invest my future with this place because they don't deserve it.
I think, Frank, I'm glad you just said that, because it's important. If you're listening to this, we've got 8 points on here, 8 red flags that you should pay attention to. And any one of them should not make you exclude a company from your search. It's about layered risk. If there are 5 or 6 of these that you can check off, run. That's too much. If there's 1 or 2 and the other 6, they seemed okay, it's probably a pretty good company. Cut them a little bit of slack. But if everything we're saying seems to be ringing a bell, I'd be looking at a different place to go work. It's layered risk.
So what I'm going to say is this. So there are times we get this right, and there are times my company gets it wrong. We had a woman who we interviewed who was hot to trot, super excited, but fell through the cracks. She did not get followed up on for 2 weeks. I called and begged her to come and work here, and she said no. So we screwed up. Like, that's all there is to it. Like, she could have been a great hire for us, and we just lost her faith. Overall, we have a great process, but something fell through the cracks, and that does happen from time to time. So, you as an employee, you have to think about these things and say, is it part of a broader work? As an employer, you have to make sure, it's going to happen, but hopefully you're on the right side of the ledger more times than not.
Frankie, I'm going to pair 2 of them for the next one that we're going to talk about. So I want to pair these 2 together. So right. Number 4, the interviews and the process were way too easy. And I'm going to say the next one we're going to talk to is number 5. The interview is overly tough. So I think those are both could be red flags if they just seem obnoxious on either side. So starting with the easy, interviews are 15 minutes. These are all they ask are softball questions.
I want to interrupt you, and there's a reason. Why do you want to link them? Like, why do you think these 2 things are linked?
Because I think it's important to pay attention to the process, to how their process works. Both of them are indicators of something totally different. But I think that both of these are culture questions. What is the culture in that company? The interview process that's too easy, to me, they don't really think that employees are a vital part of their strategy. They're just kind of any warm butt in a seat is fine. And when it's overly tough, the cultural challenge there is the managers think they're too important because they want to be known as tough managers instead of just getting it right. So I think the reason why I've paired both of these, even though they're on opposite spectrums, is they're both cultural red flags.
They're cultural red flags, or you're working with a manager who is deranged or out there or out to prove something or has a big ego or like something like that. So you might notice, this is real. You might have 4 interviews and you interview with somebody and they're just an asshole. And you kind of realize, well, that guy might be an ass, but the other 3 people were quite good and quite fair and quite nice. And that happens. Like, you get people who are like egomaniacs in companies. You get people that are just hard asses. And that's part of it. But again, this is the same thing we were talking about. Just because you get one hard ass doesn't necessarily mean you should, not go to that company. I mean, Ian had somebody that he was very, very close with at NVR who would probably come across as quite gruff in an interview, but it doesn't mean that that's a bad place to be. It just means that's that guy's persona. But if you get like, I do remember this, Ian, I interviewed with a company and they were all arrogant pricks. Like, they were so arrogant. And I was just like, I don't want to work there. I remember I've had one bad interview and three good ones and like that company, but I've had several where I was like, this is just cultural and this is not a place I want to be.
Yeah, I absolutely had an experience like that where the first two people I interviewed with, it was for a president job, and one would have been my peer, one would have been my direct boss. I loved them both. I was like, wow, this is great. This is when I almost moved back to Chicago. Um, and then I met with the CEO and the CFO, and they were absolute maniacs. They were just a-holes. And one of them more than the other, but one was kind of just an egomaniac that he shit all over the sales force and ripped on his customers. They don't know what they're talking about. And the CFO was just an egomaniac. He was like, the interview was nuts. He wrote out this like question, I remember, on a piece of paper, and I had to calculate it. And he's like, look, this is sort of an intelligence test. Most people fail it. Like, before he gave it to me, and I'm like, all right, like, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but like, I did it. And he goes, wow, you actually got that right. But it was like almost insulting, and I got it right. And I'm like, I'm just looking at him like, this is the stupidest interview ever. I would hate working for you. You're a prick. But I didn't want to go to that company because those guys wanted me to know how smart they were and how tough they were, instead of just trying to evaluate whether I could help their company.
So this is kind of critical about this entire episode, and it's this: they're interviewing you, but if you're paying attention, you're interviewing them. This is where you're going to work, and you spend more time at work than you do at home or with your kids. Like, you spend a lot of time at work. So to that end, you got to make a very good decision, and how people behave are kind of soft tells of how they're going to treat you. And that's a perfect thing. Like, this guy's an ass. Like, I don't want to move my family and uproot everybody and be stuck in a room with this jerk.
Yeah, Frankie, and both those. So I told you I interviewed with 4 people there, and 2 I really liked. Both of the 2 I really liked were gone within a year. And they were like, yeah, those guys are assholes. Like, we kind of know now why, because they were really bummed when they made me an offer and I said no. And they were really bummed. And I really never told them directly. I just said, I don't think it's a good cultural fit. But the guy who would have been my boss, he knew what that meant. He knew I was hot to trot until I met the 2 jerks. And I was like, out. I'm going to stay where I'm at. And when he left, he was like, you made the right decision. Those guys they were the worst to work for. But I think on the other spectrum too, if it's too easy to get into, Frankie, if it's all softball questions, if it's 15-minute interviews, they're probably a desperate company for people. And if it's that easy to get in, it can be good. Your ego can feel great. Like, wow, I killed it. No, you didn't. Everyone killed it. And the problem with that is, when you go work there, how talented is the group of people you're going to work with? If the criteria is that low to get in, your teammates are not going to be the most talented people.
So I was in college and I took a physics class, and I remember I got an A. And I think I struggled to get an A in high school physics. I might have gotten a B plus. I didn't do great, and I did okay. But I remember I met someone like while I was in this physics class, and they were like a physics major. And I was talking about my professor. I'm like, man, I'm doing really well in this class. And he's like, yeah, it's the test. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, he's the nicest man. He gives the easiest tests. I'm like, oh, for a minute, I thought like maybe I'd gotten smarter.
But everyone was getting an A.
There was a physics PA who said he makes the test really easy because he thinks physics is hard and he wants to encourage people to get excited about it. And I realized right there, like, yeah, I don't belong in physics.
But you want to go work in companies where the bar is relatively high with talent, because that's you want to go work for a team that wins. That's out. So I
want to go through this real quickly, and I'll kind of talk about it. But there's a difference between being a jerk, being too easy, being too hard, and kind of striking the sweet spot, right? It's a little bit like the porridge. You got to find the one that's not too hot, not too cold. So what we do is we put you through, this is our process. We hire 7.7% of people who apply get hired. So less than 1 out of 100 who apply get hired. About 1 out of 130 will get hired. So is it too rigorous? Maybe. We have really good retention. We have a lot of people we promote from within. We're very specific on what we look for. And what we do is the first thing we do with your application, we have you do a psychological profile. Takes 5 minutes. And if you are not one of the right profiles for the job you're applying for, we don't consider you for the next step. If that works, we're going to send you a second profile. And then we have ranges within that profile because we've seen it, and we hire consultants who say these are the ranges that seem to make sense. And that's really important too. The next piece that we go through is if you're going into the sales role, there's a sales specific test, and then there's yet another test. So we do these tests, and then we do them kind of feathered in with phone screens. And all of this stuff is to make sure we're not being terribly rigid, but we're making sure that you're the right fit, because we treat this very seriously. And people will comment to us that the process is organized and the process is pretty rigorous, but it isn't unfair. And if anybody ever push back, we say, these are the reasons why. And we talk about it if you ask, but that is organized. Like, I feel like where we are as a small business is toggling somewhere between easy and hard, but we make you realize we're organized, it's purposeful. And if you get in, you deserve it. And people will always say, like we do on your first day at work, we'll do kind of around the room with the company on a Zoom call. And we'll be like, all right, what would you like to say? Like, the interview process was pretty tough. I'm very happy to be here. That's how it starts. It's like, hey, we're going to treat this process serious. We're going to treat you serious, but it's not ridiculous, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it shouldn't feel easy. It shouldn't feel easy because you want to work for a company that hires good talent. You want to go work on a team that has a lot of talented people, because that's a winning team. Winning teams get more sales, they get more customers, they make more money, and they pay you more, and they promote you. You want to get to a team that wins.
You mentioned something in the intro that I want to bring up again. So there was an article that I read, I think it was in a journal maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it talked about the Great Resignation. And one of the things with the Great Resignation is companies are overlooking a lot. And we're in a process right now where people are like not looking at your criminal records. They're not pulling certain things. They're just so desperate for hires.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is this, like, if you can get in now, do it. It's a great time to get in the door. If there's something on your resume that you're not proud of, or might have been a black mark, because companies are desperate for talent. And once you're in, you might be able to stay. But what'll happen is this, and Ian, I've seen it proved out multiple times. People who make sacrifices during this time because they're desperate will ultimately have problems later. And that's what's going to happen. That's it. These things just don't age well.
But it is good news for all of our followers that are convicted felons. So, we love you too. We love all of our followers. But if you've got some big time check marks, you go ahead and apply right now. We love you guys. So number 5, no interviewer can seem to agree on your title, your role, what you're supposed to be doing. This is a big red flag. So if you've got your direct manager can't really, he explains your role in a totally different way than his manager explained it to you in a previous interview, than HR explained it. It could be that they're not exactly sure what you're going to be doing, why they're hiring you. They might just have no idea how to get results. So I think that doesn't mean you don't go there. That just might mean that there's a portion of their business that's not running well, and they just want to fix it, and they're not quite sure what the position should be. But before you start for that company, I think you need to understand objectively, and we're going to get at the end of this a little bit on great questions to ask, but I would ask a company like this, how will success be measured for my role? At the end of, if I'm getting hired right now in December of 2021, at the end of 2022, if I've done what you thought I was supposed to do when you created this position, how will you measure what success looked like? I think it's very important that you can quantitatively ask someone to tell you, how are you going to measure me? Because if they can't say that, your position will be cut really fast in a downturn, or if just no one ever agreed on what you were doing in the first place. So I think having some concrete specificity to your role is incredibly important when you interview.
I think so too. And a company that doesn't have that well defined is an unorganized company. Like what we do with our job offers is we put the scope in there, and the interviewers know what that is. When you walk in, we know what you're interviewing for. We know what the strengths are. We know what you're going to be doing. You can ask that. We can give you specific examples in most instances of someone who's already done that job, and this is what their path has looked like. Like Trevor has been here for 18 months. He started off in lead gen. He's moved over to this role. You're going to be doing something similar. What if I have I like the construction side more than I like the sales side? We have an example of that one too. So these are the type of things that you like. Some companies, I have a friend of mine, his niece is like the second or third, I think she's the third hire. The two owners, and she was like the first permanent hire with a company that's gone bananas. Like they're about to go public, and it's like she's in an incredible spot. That company, she thought the people were good people. She was a temp there, and she kind of realized I got to just hold on hard because this thing's going fast, and there was a lot of uncertainty there. But it was the trajectory was incredible. So that's one side of it. But a company that doesn't have that type of growth trajectory, they should be able to give you a pretty good understanding of what it is that you're going to do, or have some examples they can draw upon, especially if it's a publicly traded company, because they've been around for a long time.
The next two that are on our outline, I think, are relatively obvious. But if you've got an interviewer that talks about the people on his or her team like dirt, run. I think this is one where you don't need a lot of layered risk. If that is one of the decision makers in the company, and they are just, look, everyone is usually hiring because they want to upgrade their team, do something else. But when you get a sense that that person is just trashing their team all the time, if you're willing to do that to a complete stranger, to talk about people that report to you that are busting their ass to help you get results as a leader in the organization, what are you going to do, around people that you know and that you trust? That to me is a very strong indicator of a disloyal leader that's doesn't really think of their people as strategic assets. For me, that would almost be a knockout.
Completely agree. We talked a little bit about the jerky interviewer. It's kind of the same thing to me. Like you just need to pay attention to that. It seems emblematic of this is not the place that I want to be.
And then I would say, open your eyes when you're walking through the office to go interview. Normally you're getting led back to some manager's office, walking by the cubes. Look around. Is it strangely quiet? Can all you hear is tapping on a keyboard as you walk through the office? Is it overly haphazard? Is it loud? Is it crazy? Are they running around with their hair on fire? Pay attention. Don't just get your tunnel vision on to the person who's leading you to the interview. Pay attention to what the atmosphere feels like in the office. Even in that little 10 seconds of walking through the office, you can get a pretty damn good idea of what a day looks like in that office.
For sure. And ask to talk to people. Like this is a serious thing. It's like, this is your profession. This is your chosen career. If you have uncertainty around something, ask, see, feel, touch. So this kind of flip-flops it, but I'll say what we do. So we've had 3 people in the last 12 months that I wasn't positive about. And I've done 2 different things. I've turned 2 into interns, and one I started as a 1099. And one of them was a bartender. He was a bartender. He was a friend of someone who worked here. And literally someone moved here from out of town, and this was his first friend. So I called my employee up and I said, I'm not positive about him. So I'm going to go one of 2 paths. Path 1 is I'm just going to say no. Path 2 is, and this person referred him, and this person also works in our recruiting department. So he ended up delivering the message. I said, path 2 is this. Why doesn't he take a leave of absence from his current job? Like ask for 2 weeks off and come here and try this. We'll pay him as a 1099. We'll give him a fair wage. And if this is the right job for him at the end of 2 weeks, we'll know. Yeah. But if this isn't the right job for him, well, guess what? We'll know that too. And 7 days in, we're like, this isn't it. But we didn't tell the guy, hey, come on board, try it. We didn't say no. We gave him kind of a test run. And we're a
I
small
love that
company.
because it's low risk for both of you.
Yes.
You didn't have that young guy quit his job and come work for you, and then you had to get rid of him. You were real honest with him that you had your concerns, and here's why. You let him do kind of a low risk trial of your company. Look, after a week, you could have said, this isn't for me. I don't like your company. And that would have been fine too.
It's a test drive for both of us.
You. Yeah.
Yep. The other thing we did is I had a guy come over my house one day, and he was from DoorDash. And he just started asking me a bunch of questions. And I have a nice house. He asked me, he's like, tell me about your house. And he asked me a bunch of questions. And I'm like, I'm sitting here. It was actually somebody who had bought me a bottle of wine. And he came from DoorDash to deliver it. And I talked to him for a few minutes. And I gave my business card. And I said, if you're really interested, reach out to us. He reached out like 4 hours later when his shift was over. But I wasn't positive if he was a good hire. He went through the whole process. I still didn't know. So what we came up with was, he's a young kid. I said, would you be willing to be an intern for 3 months? If you were willing to come here and be an intern for 3 months, I'll guarantee you 3 months. But at the end of the internship, we can say no, or we could say yes. And an intern's easier because it's easier. You're not firing. It's kind of a finite period of time. Kid did an incredible job. The internship was 12 weeks, 11 weeks, 10 weeks in or something like that, 9-10 weeks in. We're like, we're going to offer you a full-time position. It worked out great. But those are things as an employer that work in your favor. That's when people go to Glassdoor and write down, this is a fair place to work. They treat me well.
That's a win-win for both of you. So he comes to take an internship. He's paid probably roughly the same as he was at DoorDash. He could always go back to DoorDash at the end of those 3 months. If he didn't like working for you, you could always say, look, this hasn't worked out so well in the 3 months, and not give him a permanent offer. But for both of you, you ended up with a good employee. He ended up with a better job, but both of your risk was very low. Your risk was 3 months of paying someone as an intern who might not have performed well. His risk was, I don't even know what his risk was, because you could always go back and do DoorDash again. So again, those win-wins are awesome in business when you can find them and structure them in ways that aren't bullshit win-wins. Like, I'm making this seem like a win, but it's really all in my favor as the company. You truly gave that guy a chance to go show you, and he did, and now he's off on a better career trajectory.
That's it. And that's the fun thing about working in a small business. But what we're talking about here is you as the interviewee. You can ask, hey, if there's any reservations about me, do you have an option where I could show you over a small period of time how committed I am, how much I want this, how much I want to try it. And NVR is not going to do that, but a small business like mine could try it. So there's ways with the right company to figure out, are you a fit or not? And a good, smart business, which I think we are, will provide you with a problem solving of, hey, we'll try this. I know it's a little different than what you came in for, but would you be willing?
So if you haven't seen, oh, sorry, go ahead, Frank.
No, I've done it. I've been doing it for like 5 years, different ways like this. Some have worked, some haven't. But it, like you said, it's a real way to do a test drive to be fair to the person.
So let's go through rapid fire here to finish this off. So what kind of questions can you ask at the end of your interview, which I think is very important. You ask great questions at the end of an interview, because that's really your last chance to leave a great impression on the interviewer. And to me, great employees ask great questions. So if you're an applicant, you should start asking great questions if you want to impress me, because that means that you'll ask great questions when you come work for me. So I think the first two questions I would ask, and these are similar but a little different. Why is the position open? And why did the last person leave? So the position might be open because we're growing so much. I need more of it. I need more salespeople. I need more customer service reps. I need more managers. But it could be open because the last person left. And so if the position's open because they're growing, that's fantastic. You want to go to a growing company. That's the best answer you could possibly hear, is we're growing like a weed because we have something that people really want that's priced appropriately and they're buying a lot of it. But if the person left, that's when you need to dig a little bit. If that manager says, well, the last person is no longer with us. Okay, what happened? Did you fire them? Did they leave on their own? Did you do a layoff? Why did that person leave? And if it was, we made the decision, okay, why didn't it work out? What am I coming into? Who am I replacing? you're trying to kind of find some of the skeletons of what's going on. And you're trying to also see, I'm trying to find, is that hiring manager honest? Can they just look me in the eyes and say, it didn't work out, and here's why it didn't work out? That's best case scenario. If they didn't leave, we had to fire them. They weren't performing very well. Okay, I can handle that. That's what I'm walking into.
So one of the questions that I really like, and we're filming this at the end of 2021, but I like to know, how did the company handle COVID? And the reason I say that is this: if this is a couple of years from now and COVID isn't a thing anymore, you can say, how does the company handle adversity? Can you give me an example? So I think well-run companies had a plan. We had a COVID plan on the 16th of March, 2020. We made moves on the 20th of March. We've adjusted. We've changed people's schedules. We've made big changes to our business based upon what life looks like. And I can tell you that specifically if you ask. Do you go on appointments? It depends on the person who we're meeting on the appointment. If they don't want us to, we have technology. Like, there's all types of stuff. The restaurant my wife and I went to the night we got engaged still hasn't opened. Ian, you and I ate there together. Heritage, that place is incredible. Still hasn't opened. They haven't figured it out. Everybody else has figured out how to be open. And like, I've got a friend who owns a restaurant in, out west, and they haven't figured out how to open it. Like, that to me is bad management.
Yeah.
Like, we're far enough in where you should see these things. So asking a question like that, how have you dealt with adversity?
Love that. I just love that. The COVID question is so good, Frank, because it's like,
it's a good one because it really kind of
decisive. Are you problem solvers? Do you react? Do you move quickly, or do you wish for the old days, or do you accept reality as it's changed? That tells me so much about an organization and its leadership team.
I love it. The other one I would ask is, like, in a real estate business like mine, like, what are you doing for the next downturn? And I will ask, like, why do you ask? What do you want to know? Where's this question coming from? Who else are you interviewing with? And a lot of people in our line of work will interview with, home builders, or I'm interviewing someone who works at a home builder. And what I'll say is this: like, I used to work at a home builder. And when I worked at that home builder, we had 62 divisions. And in 36 months, we went from 62 divisions to 27 divisions, because all we did was build houses and do mortgages, and that was it. But they had tons of money, so they were able to do that and get leaner. I can't do that. So what we do is we service two separate parts of the market. Part of the market that we service with our rentals is our affordable rentals that are basically shelter that we've talked about before. And then we do a discretionary move-up property on the other side. So what we're doing is we're positioned for both. Right now, we're taking advantage of interest rates that have come down. And that's going to give us a ton of free rent cash going into a recession. So we're prepped for it. Will it be bumpy? Of course. Will we have to make adjustments? Most likely. Are we ahead of it and thinking about it? Yeah. But if you hear an answer like that from an owner, and if you ask anybody who works here, I'll probably give you the best answer, but I've got about 20 people who can answer that because they've been taught.
How will the next slowdown impact your business? How is your company set up to succeed in a recession? You get people that are leaving companies to go to realtor offices or to loan officers in finance. What happens if interest rates go up 2%? Are you based all on refis and you're screwed? Are you hoping that just keeps going, or what's your process to get purchased? So all of those things, Frankie, are awesome when you get into some of those questions. I think the last two I would also just say is, I always ask, can I talk to someone who's in this position? Can I, if you're interviewing for a lead gen position, can I talk to someone on the lead gen team, maybe one or two people? If they're hesitant to put you in front of someone who's doing the job, they have something to hide. That's a problem. Like, so if they say, no, we don't do that, they're afraid that person might say some negative things about the company. I know you have no problem. I never had any problem. Sure, sit down. How many do you want to talk to? What? Let's take you over right now. Let me go see if they got some time. Let's bring them in here. Because if you run a great culture and a great company, those people doing the job could be your best salespeople. And any leader who does a good job with their team is not worried about you talking to anyone in that role.
And what I think is critical here too, as well, if the company is well run, there's probably someone in your interview panel that does the job or has done, or maybe they don't do it currently, but they have done the job.
Yeah, they're proactively doing this, so you don't have to even ask the question. But if they don't do that, ask that question. And the last one I would just say is, and I love this question, what doesn't your company do well? And for me, this is the mirror version of an interviewer asking you a failure question. Tell me about a time you failed. By asking what doesn't your company do well, you're sort of asking them a failure question. And what you're trying to find out is what kind of level of self-confidence does this manager have? Because if they say nothing, we're amazing at everything. Yeah, you're full of shit. Every company's got its warts. How confident are you to say, you know what, here's 3 things that we don't do particularly well, which is why we're interviewing for this position and you could help us with. So I'd love your thoughts on this. Let me tell you the 3 things we're not doing well right now that as an owner, as a manager, as an executive, I'm disappointed in our results. You're also listening. Are they trashing their team? Or are they just saying, you know what, here's where I'm not doing a great job of getting results as a leader. And this is why I'm interviewing this position. And I would love your thoughts on how you might be able to help that. That shows confidence. That shows a company that can face reality, that everything is not always peachy keen. So I love that question of what don't you do well?
I think it's a wonderful question to ask. And I mean, like, if you ask me that question, I think we do a lot of things pretty well. I would tell you there's a few things we suck at, but I can also say our permit process isn't great. Not me, that's partly the city because they suck. People can be honest and just say, you know, work is a 4-letter word for a reason. There's problems, but we're being proactive. We're rowing in the same direction. You're going to get support. Like those are the things that you want to hear.
Like if I were to ask that question of Frank as my co-host, he would say, sometimes Ian will ask me a question. I have a full mouth of salad and I have to mumble my way through the answer because I was eating when I should have been listening and jumping in on the dialogue. What you got me? That's some salted nuts, some salted Virginia nuts.
Nothing better than salty nuts, Ian.
Hey, great episode, brother. Great talking to you. I'm glad that you
nice
didn't
to
see any
you
red
yesterday.
flags
It's
when I
been a
asked you to
long
do a
time.
podcast. You didn't see any red flags at the time. You missed a lot of them. You missed a lot of red flags.
Hey, I didn't miss that homeless guy in the hoodie.
You most certainly didn't. See you, homie.
See you, brother. Bye.